Last night, a couple of people asked me if I was preaching, and a couple of people asked me today, and I said, no, I'm just speaking. Mike is going to preach. Some of mine is going to be serious. Some of mine is going to be funny. I've already found out this weekend from yesterday that I have another wife, Cassie, which I didn't know I had. And Cassie is actually Mike's wife, not mine. And Anita knew that. She just forgot. My wife is actually under the weather. Her back is messing her up, and she got her second Moderna shot Friday against her better judgment, and that's another story, but her arm has been killing her. Let me throw out a disclaimer. I did not meet my wife at camp. I did not propose to her at camp. In fact, a little bit over 22 years ago, I went to a nursing home here in town to ask another girl out that I knew from years and years and years ago at Oil Belt Camp. And she turned me down. And thank God she did. And she introduced me to my wife, Cindy, and we went on a blind date, and we dated for about 4 months and got married. I proposed to her. Kevin said he didn't have a ring or anything. I proposed to my wife in the basement of our house as she was doing laundry. And this past August 15th, we have been married 22 years, so God has blessed us with, I had 3 kids, she had 2, and we have 5 grandkids. So things have been good. I've been asked to kind of share our story, which is small compared to God's story of what He's done at Oil Belt Camp. And I was reminded of the book, The Story by Frazee, or however you pronounce his name, that we're just the lower story and God is the upper story. And that's kind of what I feel like at Oil Belt Camp. My dad was honored in 2019 for 45 years serving on the camp board. I did not know that they were going to be here today until I pulled in. But think about that, 45 years of the 75 years of the history of Oil Belt Camp and what my dad and my parents have witnessed and what they've seen. At best, we could figure out through talking with Tyler and that and some pictures and that, they had been coming to family camp since the very beginning. We've seen a picture back there Whitney found in 1969 when Neil Kinley was the camp dean of family camp, and Chuck Northleaf was the camp manager, and that was not the first year, I don't believe, but one of the very early years of Oil Belt Camp. And up until 2018, Mom and Dad had been coming to family camp, and were honored, I believe, the same year that Jerry and Jeannie Einert were honored on their retirement. So Mike and I both had the privilege of working with them on the camp board. I was on the camp board, I think, for 16 years, and Mike up until about, 93 when they moved to Beardstown Christian Church. There was a time that for a couple of years, I believe, that they discontinued family camp because of attendance or whatever. And then a couple of years later, they brought back family camp, and has continued since then. For several years, my parents, along with Craig and Terry Little, and you might remember Craig and Terry, he went on to be with the Lord Jesus Christ. But for several years, with First Christian in Salem, Mom and Dad and Craig and Terry Little came over and helped cook at Oil Belt in the old kitchen. And there's a lot of stories that surround that and things that probably should not have happened, but they did. Mike and Cassie worked at Oil Belt the summer of 1981. And in fact, for 2 years after that, after they were married, they served here at Oil Belt. In fact, their first home was the house trailer that Kevin mentioned that sat over here about where the boys' dorm is at. And I remember that house trailer very vividly. Dick Shipley, and I hope I don't get this mistaken because Richard and Kathy go to church where I preach at Young's Chapel. Richard preached there for about 15 and a half years. But back in about 1974, somewhere in that area, Dick Shipley and his wife at that time, Carol, who had passed away from cancer, were camp managers here. It wasn't too long after that Rodney Oakes became the first camp manager of Old Belt Christian Service Camp. But when I first came to camp, as best I can figure, it was around 1965, 66, somewhere in that area when I was going into fourth grade. And Ed Dowden, if I'm not mistaken, Ed was from, I think, Christian Church in Olney or a church over in that area, and he was the dean at that time. One of the memories of working with Dick and Carol Shipley, and we laughed about this a couple of weeks ago when we was talking about it at church. I had a fear of a young girl peeing down my back, and Renee Shipley, who goes to Nashville Christian Church, who lives in Oakville, Renee was about 3 years old at that time. I think her last name is Killian or something like that now. And but I had her up on my shoulders, and Richard knew that I always had that fear that she would pee down my neck. And I told him, I said, if she ever does, I will never hold her again the rest of that summer. Well, lo and behold, it wasn't too long into the summer that she was on the top of my shoulders, 2 or 3 years old, and Dick snuck up behind me and poured a glass of warm water down my neck. And I was led to believe that whole summer that she'd peed down my neck. It wasn't until about the last week of camp that summer that he told me what he'd done. And we were laughing about that a couple of weeks ago and telling some of the people after church was over. And I didn't do that. Of course, he would just laugh and grin. I can remember every Wednesday, Anna Jane Roberts, homemade chicken and noodles. And, of course, back then, you could get away with stuff that you couldn't get away with today because of state regulations. But every Wednesday in the old kitchen, Anna Jane would have these fresh homemade noodles laid out. And I would sneak in there or go in there just about every week, and she knew I was going to come in. I'd grab me a handful and eat those raw. And, man, they were good. They were good raw, and they were good cooked as well. She was a great cook. I believe that Lorraine Matthews from Fairfield was the head waitress that summer back in about 1976. Lorraine was just a little bit older than I was. You talking about sewer problems. We had sewer problems galore that summer. Man, it was terrible. If you remember the old boys' dorm and the old girls' dorm and the sewer problems, it was nasty here, what it was. And I don't know where they've had those problems since, but we sure did that summer. I remember somewhere over in this area, maybe where this building is at now, I lived in the swamp. Richard and Carol, I knew I'd get that wrong. Richard and Carol lived in the house trailer that Kevin lived in, and Mike and Cassie. I lived in the swamp, and there was a wall, I believe, that divided that. I was on one side, and some of the waitresses, I think, were on the other side. And what a exciting summer that was. When it rained, when it poured, I can remember going around and the old wooden windows that were held up, and I would open those and the wooden sticks would fall down. And man, I was accused lots of times and griped at by breaking perfume bottles and all kinds of stuff when those windows were slammed. Another memory that I have is when Rodney Oakes became the first full-time camp manager. I had the privilege of spending a couple of trips with Rodney, and that one of them was Grundy Mountain Mission School. I have no idea what year that was, but and I got to preach my first sermon at Grundy, Virginia. It was terrible. But it was short. It was horrible. I don't even remember to this day what it was, but I remember that trip very vividly. The second trip that I remember with Rodney Oakes was we went to Breckenridge, Colorado, just outside of Denver in the old bus, and we went snow skiing. Got out there, tried to snow ski at night. Never could get the hang of it, but we attempted to do. And again, I think it was shared the other night. I don't share this to puff myself up or with pride or brag or anything, but if it wasn't for Oil Belt Camp, and I think Mike's going to share a little bit later, if it wasn't for Oil Belt Camp, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I wouldn't be in the ministry. I wouldn't be preaching because of the memories and that I have here. Ed Frost, Steve Collins. You remember Jelly Belly? His name was mentioned the other night. Bruce Huff, always the dorm dad. Brush those pearly whites, flush that handle, push it down. I remember Chester Groves and the Gospel in a Nutshell. Keith Graham, is Keith by any chance here? I was hoping he'd be here this weekend. Who could forget Keith Graham? The Willie Worm song. One year Roxy got hurt from that song. The Jelly Bean Parade, the Black Kitty Cat that James Mulvaney always got accused of stealing the kitty cats. Stormy Weather, you remember that game? Hey, some of these younger kids, man, they miss out on some of the good stuff of Oil Belt Camp. The Oil Belt 500, there's a young lady sitting back here that she was injured in the Oil Belt 500 in the chapel, had to go to a chiropractor. She didn't win. She was injured. I think she probably got honorable mention for that. Dennis Arnold, man, fun. Mary Drewis and I were talking the other night about working with her and with Dennis Arnold. If you ever want somebody to pull off a tick of a young boy in an area that we won't mention, Dennis Arnold's your man. There was a young boy probably in about 4th or 5th grade and had a tick, and we all nominated Dennis Arnold to take care of that. We teased him about that forever. If you've ever worked camp with Dennis Arnold, he always said, I hate kids. I hate them. Of course, everybody knew that he was joking, and some of the kids didn't know how to take him. But Dennis was such fun to work with, and the memories that I have with Dennis. I have served with my daughter, my stepdaughter, my brother, Cassie, and so many others. My wife being the nurse for so many times. I don't even know how long I've been up here, but I'm almost done. So many memories, so many baptisms that I can think back to. Two of the baptisms that I remember very much has been since my stepdaughter came into my life, and had the privilege of baptizing my brother-in-law and my nephew here at Oil Belt over here. Kinsey, his daughter, and the two sons had been praying for Gary to accept Christ, and every meal they would pray for Gary, for my brother-in-law to give his life to Christ and be baptized. And to the point that Kinsey would say, Dad, don't you want to go to heaven with us? Dad, don't you want to go to heaven? And I had the opportunity and the privilege to baptize him here at Oil Belt along with his son. One of the toughest weeks that I remember serving as dean was the year that, and I have no idea what year that was, but it was the year that Amy Schultz was killed down in Kell. She was 10 years old. She was brutally raped, brutally murdered. The gentleman is still behind bars. But she had just been murdered the week before, or a few weeks before, the week that I was dean of a week at camp with age kids that knew her and went to school with her. And thank God I had a professional counselor from Louisville, Illinois, by the name of Cindy Coleman, who was on staff that week. And her dad just passed away here not too many weeks ago. Cindy helped me out a great deal because I didn't know how to witness to these kids. I didn't know how to minister to them. I didn't know how to counsel them. But Cindy helped me out a great deal. I was asked last night if I was going to preach. I'm not preaching. I'm done. I did bring a Bible, and Nita said, "Why you're not going to preach? You're not going to use it." But I wanted to bring a Bible and stick my notes in there, my phone, because I didn't want to go too long. Mike's going to preach, and I know you'll be excited to what he has to say. It's been a great weekend. May God continue to bless Oil Belt for another 75 years.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Yeah. We on? Can you hear me? Those that want to? Can you hear me? Thank you, Rusty. Oh, man, that man's wanted to be a preacher as long as I've known him. I'm serious. I grew up, obviously, in the same bedroom with him, and he always knew he was going to be a preacher someday. And I appreciate so much getting to share the stage with him. Hey, here's my favorite joke. I think it'll fly well in this part of the country, and it ties in with the scripture I'm going to use in a little bit. This guy was driving by a church one day, and he happened to go in. And he went into the secretary's office. He said, "Hey, I want to talk to the head hog at the trough." Secretary was taken back a bit and said, "Excuse me, I don't think I heard what you said." He said, I want to talk to the head hog at the trough. And she said, I don't know who you are, sir. But if you're referring to our minister, he may not be that good looking, and he's not that great of a preacher, but I think you at least need to respect the fact that he is the minister at this church. And the man said, "Well, I don't know about all that." But he said, "I was driving by your building, and I saw on your sign that you're raising money for a new building project, and I just stopped in to write a check for $50,000. That secretary pointed down the hallway and said, "Well, I'll be. Here comes the fat pig now." Man, I want you to know, I feel like the head hog at the trough today. I mean, I cannot tell you how honored and even humbled I am to be standing here with so many different people who have stood here this weekend to celebrate this camp. I want to get this out of the way. This is much more special for me than it is for you. You're hearing this sermon today may not be all that special for you. This is a big deal for me. I needed to come this weekend and celebrate what this camp has done in my life. Tyler did a great job of just saying to Anita the impact that she has had in his life. And I feel that way about so many people. And to work with you, Anita, is incredible. I did a few revivals back in the day. Here's kind of how that would always go. I'd get a phone call and they'd say, "Hey, we're looking for a revival speaker." I said, "Well, that's cool." They said, "Well, Les Bolt's not available." and we were hoping you could come. And I said, "No problem. I don't mind being number two. I'll go ahead and do that." And I got to work with Anita a couple times on that. And man, I tell you what, if I could preach the way she plays and sings, we'd have one good service here this morning, wouldn't we? She is incredible. But I needed to come this weekend to celebrate this camp. I just need to tell you, this is where it all began for me, really. I mean, my parents are here, and they did a great job, I think, of raising us three kids. And I love it that my mom and dad have always been Christians, and they've passed so many important things on to me. But I'm telling you, this really is where it began for me. When I was too young to come to camp, I came to be a bell ringer. I just wanted to be here. Jack Busby and Charlie Duke and Steve Collins and some of those guys would have me as their bell ringer. I couldn't even tell time. And they'd say, "Hey, when the little hand's on the 8 and the big hand's on the 12, go out there and ring that bell." Well, that bell was way bigger than me, way heavier than me. And I'd jump up on that. I don't know much about bells, whatever that circle thing is that you use to ring a bell. And I'd throw all my weight back and I'd ring that bell when they told me to go do that. I just wanted to be here. I just wanted to be here. This place is like holy ground to me. I feel like when I walk onto this property that I need to take my shoes off. This is where it all began for me. For some reason, my youth minister, Ed Frost, asked me to serve as faculty. I'd never done that before. It's one thing to ring the bell. It's another to teach a class. I'd never done that before. And I came here in the summer of 1981 after I'd graduated high school. And I taught a class on how to become a Christian. And I tell you what, my whole life changed that week. I taught a half a dozen kids during that week of camp, and 2 of those kids gave their life to Christ that week and were baptized. And it had little to do with me and a whole lot to do with the Holy Spirit. But I remember thinking to myself, man, I could do this. I could do this. I had my life halfway figured out at that point. And my call into ministry was not so much a smack in the face or God tapping me on the shoulder. It was just this discontent with what I had planned for my life. What I had planned didn't seem important or special anymore. And man, it happened here. And I made my decision that week to become a preacher. I went home and told my dad, hey, hope you don't mind, but we're not going to cash in on that scholarship to that junior college. And he assured me he'd still pay for my education. That was critical. That was important. And man, been doing this, believe it or not, been doing this almost 40 years. Here's something else that happened that week. I met the head waitress and made her mine. Her name was Cassie Dasher, and we were in that old sweaty cafeteria. And I looked across the room, and she was sweating a little. She was just glowing, had this big smile on her face. She was bent over the sink because she was way taller than the sink was, and she was doing dishes. And man, I realized at that point that my life was about to change, and we got to talking a little bit that week, and I knew at that moment that her and I were going to be together. And she'll tell you maybe no, she knew better. She knew better, but it took her a little while to come along. But man, I met her here. And along with that decision of going into ministry, the most significant thing, this place provided for me was a spouse who just has always been there for me. She is such a great partner in life, and she has been an incredible partner in ministry. She has landed me 2 really good churches. She really has. Beardstown would send me packing tomorrow, but they'd keep her. She'd stay, because that's the kind of gal that she is. And we are such blessed people right now. We're living this verse right now. It's 3 John, just one chapter in that book, so it's verse 4, where the writer says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. Any parents in the room and your kids are walking with the Lord, and they've married people that are walking with the Lord. They're raising your kids in the church. They're bringing them to camp. And you're just in that phase of life where, you know what? It's all good because these kids love Jesus. My oldest daughter, Danielle, married to a wonderful man named Travis. He cheers for the Cincinnati Reds. I have no idea why. I do this year, but I don't know why he would do that. But they've given us 3 wonderful grandsons, Grayson, Carter, and Weston. They're raising those boys to love Jesus. My middle child, Whitney, married Dustin Draear. They serve at Cornerstone. Dustin's a family minister there. Whitney works a lot with children's ministry. They're serving the Lord. They've given us beautiful Savannah and Jordan. My son, Trevor, a year ago was working for a farmer in Beardstown, and all of a sudden just felt the call of God on his life to become our student minister at our church. We were between youth ministers, and my son had been a youth sponsor for 10 years, he and his wife Sadie, and I just planted this bug in his ear. I said, Trevor, why couldn't it be you? You know these kids, you love them, you built relationships with them, they trust you. I never dreamed that I'd serve on staff with my son there at Beardstown, but he's doing a tremendous job. And they've given us 2 grand dogs, Briggs and Bella. They don't need kids right now. They'd put them down and forget where they laid them. That's where they are in their life right now. But I'm just so proud of our family. And you know what? I want to say it again. Man, it began here. It began here. I had to come back and say thank you. I had to come back and celebrate what this place has meant to my family and what it's meant to me and what it still means to us. And I've been assigned this verse, Matthew 5, verse 16. We've been there all weekend. But here's a verse that was given to me. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And Les got dangerously close last night to preaching my sermon. I was about to come get him off the stage because he was getting close to my topic. Christ followers are guiding lights in this world. And here's what I believe. What I'm trying to do with my life and what my family is trying to do with their life in guiding people to the Lord through living and showing their light for Jesus. That's what this place has always done. And that's what this place has done for me. They have lit the way for me. I mean, they have pointed me in the right direction. This idea of not calling attention to ourselves, but pointing people to God. Not being saved by our good deeds, but allowing our good deeds to direct others to the one who has saved us. You know, the motivation being to make much of Him and to make Him famous. And again, Les introduced this last night. For our light to be seen, we live openly in this world. He used a phrase that I already had down in my notes, and that is that we are visible witnesses of the Lordship of Jesus Christ in our lives. That's what this whole Matthew 5 thing is about, that we be visible witnesses. And what I want to do is stack that idea against a couple of other verses, give you 3 things to remember. We'll sing a chorus and I'll be done. But in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, and I love it from the New Living Translation, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. Here it is. And you will be my witnesses. Here's what I love about the NLT. Telling people about me everywhere. In Jerusalem and throughout Judea and Samaria and even to the ends of the earth. Matthew 5:16 stacks up nicely with Acts chapter 1 verse 8, and that is that we are to be visible witnesses of Christ, whether that's shining your light or sharing your light. We're just living this thing out in front of people so they can come to know this man Jesus like we do. And what I want to do is move over to another story in Mark chapter 5. This is one of my very favorite stories in the Bible. This is that story where a man is possessed, not just with one demon, but with many, many demons. In fact, the demon's name was Legion. He said, for we are many, as he was talking with Jesus. And these demons begged to be cast out of this man into these pigs that were there. I think there were a couple of thousand of them that were drowned as a result of all of this. And later on, this man that had been demon possessed, it says he was sitting and in his right mind as people came by, and they looked and they were shocked and even scared of what they saw. And I just love this story because in the chapter before, in Mark 4, Jesus had just stilled a restless sea. Remember how he did that? 3 words. What were they? Peace, be still. I remember being a junior dean at Oil Belt right before Vespers. You little kids have no idea what Vespers is, do you? We called it Vespers. It was our worship service. And I remember a couple of hundred kids trying to get them quiet before Vespers. And I wish I would have just had that power Jesus had, just to stand on stage and say, hey kids, peace, be still. And all of a sudden it was just calm. Jesus did that with a sea. And now with that same power, he calms or he stills this restless life. And this man who had been demon possessed now is pleading with Jesus in verse 18 so that he can stay with him. I mean, why not? He's been freed from his tormentors. Joy and gratitude alone would cause him to remain. And besides that, he had real security there. But you know what? Jesus had something else in mind for this man. And this is where I want to build just a little bit of application for you as we talk about this idea of being a visible witness. And it's not just shining the light, but it's sharing the light as well. In Mark chapter 5, verse 19, Jesus said to the man, you can't stay with me. It's not good that you stay with me. But here's what I need you to do. Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how He has had mercy on you. And what I want to do just real quickly is show you from that verse, just one verse of Scripture, what I would call God's ideal plan for being a visible witness for Jesus Christ, and not just shining the light, but also sharing the light as well. I just want to share three things with you. First of all, I used to be a huge fan of a legendary black comedian by the name of Flip Wilson. Anybody Flip Wilson? You even remember that? Young people, Google it. It'll change your life, I promise. And there was just this one routine where someone asked Flip about his religion. And Flip said, well, I'm a Jehovah bystander. And the guy said, don't you mean a Jehovah Witness? And Flip said, no, they wanted me to be a witness. I didn't want to get that involved. And my fear is that we got a lot of Jehovah bystanders. People saying one thing and doing another. People that aren't saying anything about the one that has changed their life. So I just wonder if this might help you very quickly, this ideal plan for being a visible witness. Number one, there's an ideal method, and it's found in the first part of verse 19. Go tell. Go tell. Go home and tell. Notice Jesus didn't say, pray for those people back in your town. Kind of like Matthew 9, the harvest is plentiful, but there's a shortage of workers going on. So Jesus said, pray for workers. So Jesus didn't tell this man, pray that they'll be saved. He didn't say, send the preacher by to see them. We tend to hire evangelism done, I'm afraid, sometimes in the church. He didn't say, give them a printed tract or brochure, point them to a website in order to be saved. I like that conversation in Acts 8 between Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch when Philip climbs onto the chariot and says, do you understand what you're reading? And what the Ethiopian eunuch say? How can I unless someone explain it? Go tell. Go home and tell, Jesus told this man. The message of salvation isn't just something that we shine, but it's something that we share. It has to be presented in order to be heard. Romans 10, verse 17. Faith comes from hearing the message through the word about Christ. Paul's question in that same chapter, verse 14. How can they hear without a speaker? How can they hear unless someone tells them and explains to them? And the answer to that question is easy. They can't, and they won't. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with praying and preparing and living out your faith, but all those elements are insufficient unless we tell someone, unless we say to someone. Someone said this years ago that some believers are like the Arctic River. They're frozen at the mouth. That was me for a lot of years. I didn't talk much about Jesus. I didn't share much about Jesus. And please understand, I'm not saying there's no such thing as lifestyle evangelism. That's Matthew 5, verse 16, that we live out in front of people. Philippians 1:27, our conduct ought to be worthy of the gospel. Man, if you're not living it, you can't tell it. If you're not showing it, you can't share it. Well, second, not only is there an ideal method, I think there's an ideal audience, isn't there? And in Mark chapter 5, verse 19, Jesus tells this young man, go home and tell, but he tells him where to go. Go home to your own people. Go home to your own people. Some of the older translations say, go home, go tell your friends and your family. I like the NIV where it says just go home to your own people. Those people you have relationships with, those people that know you, the people that you know. Those are the people I'm sending you to. Are you a friend of Joe's? The first man asked, man, are we friends? The other one said, we grew up together in this town. I've known him since the 4th grade. There's nothing I wouldn't do for Joe, and there's nothing he wouldn't do for me. In fact, for 40 years, we've gone through life together doing absolutely nothing for each other. And isn't it amazing how it seems like we'll do everything for a friend, everything for a loved one, everything for someone that we know and love and have built relationship with, except the most important thing, and that is to get past the beating in your chest and the sweat in the palms of your hands and say a word for Jesus. Say to a family member who's outside of Christ. Say to a friend who doesn't know Jesus. Say to a coworker. Say to a fellow classmate, hey, would you come go to church with me? Or to a student, would you come go to camp with me? Would you hear what I have to say about Jesus? Why was this an ideal audience for this man? Simple. They knew him before the demons, and they knew him after. They saw him sitting in his right mind and couldn't figure out why. Well, we know why. It was Jesus. They could readily see the change in him. Why is this an ideal audience for us? Because friends and family and people that we're close to, these are the people that we communicate best with. We've built a relationship of trust. We've spent time getting to know them. So they are the ideal audience for us. Again, to take the opportunity, not just to shine the light of Jesus to them, but to share the message of Jesus with them. We move from that lifestyle evangelism to what they call friendship evangelism, where you just understand that God has put these people in your life on purpose for a purpose. You know, don't you, that God has you where you are right now on purpose? That job you hate, God may have you there on purpose because that's where He's going to use you to reach somebody else. Last one, there's an ideal message in this ideal plan for being a witness for Christ. What was the young man to tell those that he was going home to? How much the Lord has done for you and how He has had mercy on you. Tell them your story. Tell them who you were before you met Jesus, and tell them who you are now. Help them see the difference in you now than before you came into contact with Jesus. Man, we talk about everything sometimes except for the most important thing. When we come across something good, we can't wait to share it with somebody. We get a good deal on a truck. We find a nice restaurant to eat. We found a restaurant in Macomb, Illinois called Yummy Chins. We find reasons now to go to Macomb. I went and bought a power washer the other night just so I could eat at Yummy Chins. Man, we can't wait to tell somebody about a good deal. You understand, don't you, that millions of dollars are spent on media advertising, but there is no better form of advertisement for any product other than two words. Anybody? Satisfied customer. Satisfied customer. That's how you sell stuff. Don't you think that's one reason this place has grown to the extent it has? I'm not downplaying, obviously, what God has done in this place, what great faculty members have done in this place, what great camp managers. You know, we've clapped for just about everybody today except for Tyler Mulvaney. Can we do that right now? Tyler, I'm so proud of you. He was a baby at the church in Kemundi when I left. Little curly-headed, blue-eyed dude there. And, man, I see what you're doing now. But don't you think a lot of the success of this place has been when these guys go home from a week of camp and they find their friends at school and they're asked what they did during the summer, and they get a chance to say to another kid, man, you need to go to All Belt Camp. I'm telling you right now, you need to go to All Belt Camp. Or how about the thousands of people? I was reading through those lists back there, the thousands of people that have come to know Christ over 75 years as a result of this place. I'm just asking, are you a satisfied customer of Christ? I mean, what Jesus did for you, can you beat that anywhere? He took an old person, made him new. A dead person, made him alive. A person stained with sin and made him white as snow. That's a good deal. That's a good deal. I think we need to be telling other people about that. Here's what I've always said. I know you're dying to know what I've always said. I know that's why you came today. I really do. Every person, hear me, every person, first of all, ought to have a personal testimony. You ought to be able to tell somebody else in 3 to 5 minutes how you came to know Jesus Christ and the difference He's made in your life. And you need to be able to share that at the drop of a hat, because that's how you're going to get the opportunity. It's going to come out of nowhere. And you need to be able to share your story. Number 2, everybody needs to be able to share the gospel story. You need to be able to explain to somebody else what it takes to become a Christian. Because here's the deal. If you figured it out, then you can help somebody else figure it out. Tell your story. Tell the gospel story. Number 3, ask them their story. I think that's the best lead into sharing your faith that you'll ever come across. Hey, tell me your story. Did you go to church when you were a kid? Have you ever had a moment in your life where you accepted Christ? Tell me about your life. And the next thing you know, you've got a chance to do that. Well, long story short, there's a good ending to this story in Mark chapter 5, verse 20. It says the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And here's the last phrase in verse 20. And all the people were amazed. You know what? Jesus still amazes people. It's still amazing grace, Anita. Don't stop singing it. There is no other word for grace than amazing. And whenever we shine the light, whenever we share the light, amazing things happen. I'll close with this. Many of you know that I served in my hometown of Kim-Mundy for about 12 years. I was Les Bolt's weekend youth minister for 4 years, and then I stayed on for another 7.5 years. I preached in my hometown. And I've always described that experience as kind of bittersweet. And here's why. I tell this story to set it up. A guy was test driving a vehicle, and he was driving down the street, and the guy that owned the car shop said, I'm going to tell you right now, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. And the guy test driving the car said, it must be, because it's been knocking ever since we left the lot. And you know what? Opportunity knocks, doesn't it? And sometimes it only knocks once. I guess I look back at my time in Kim-Mundy, and I realized that there were seized opportunities and there were missed opportunities. I got to perform wedding ceremonies for guys I'd gone to high school with. That was fun. That was a hoot. I baptized my high school math teacher. This is a man who whipped me in front of my sophomore geometry class. Turns out he was serious when he said, the next guy that comes in class without having his homework done, I'm going to whip in front of the class. I put him to the test because I didn't think he'd do it. I touched my toes and got whipped in front of 12 of my closest friends. And I got to baptize him later at Kim-Mundy. I held him under longer than most people that I baptized. He was turning an interesting shade of blue, about like your sweater there, and bubbles were starting to go up. But this is the same man who used to call me up to his desk, and he'd say, Mikey, and he'd call me Mikey until the day he died from cancer. He said, Mikey, you are making this harder than it really is. So when it came to sharing my faith with him when I was at Kim-Mundy, it seemed like he was never, ever going to make a decision. I got mad one day, and I went to his house, and I said, Mr. Myers, I was scared to call him Jack. I never did call him Jack. I said, Mr. Myers, you're making this way harder than it is. And he came to a revival that week, and Benny Johnson, anybody? Benny Johnson led music, Kim-Mundy, that week, and he sang the most beautiful rendition of Amazing Grace that I've ever heard in my life. Jack stepped forward during the decision time, and I asked him later, I said, Jack, was it my conversation with you? I mean, when I came out boldly to your house, and I said, Jack, you're just making this. He said, Mikey, that had nothing to do with it. Thank you for that, Jack. I appreciate that. He said, I knew when that man sang the first verse of Amazing Grace, I was going to come forward. Man, what a sweet thing to be able to baptize him. little bitter in that 2 years back to back, I performed funerals for two classmates that I never one time shared the word of Jesus with, never even mentioned his name to these two boys. And I'm telling you what, I think the hardest thing that a preacher does, at least for me, guys, you can speak for yourself, is when you stand over a body and you give a funeral message and you are at the cemetery and you look at this person, you realize, I could have said something. I could have done something, but I didn't. Wasted opportunities. And the older I get, and Les pointed out last night, I'm getting pretty old. The older I get, the more regret I have over missed opportunities. I'm about done, I promise. I'm proud to say to you today that I am a grandson of Charlie and Dolores Cohorn. Anybody in the room remember Charlie and Dolores if you're from the Louisville area? My grandma Cohorn, if saint is the right term and good term, my grandma Cohorn was a saint. She put up with Charlie. She's going to have a big old mansion in heaven. She was diagnosed with cancer, and it was bad, and she wasn't going to have any treatment done, and she needed to go to the hospital in Springfield, and she was hesitant to go. She did eventually go. But here was her dilemma. She'd been working with a young lady, sharing with her about Christ. She was afraid if she went to Springfield, she'd die and not have another opportunity to try one more time to share Christ with this lady. Man, I want to be like that. I want to be like my grandma Cohorn. Just taking advantage of every opportunity that comes our way. I asked Anita if she would lead us in this little chorus. We sang this chorus when I was a kid at the First Christian Church in Salem, Illinois. Maybe you're familiar with it. It just says this: Lord, lay some soul upon my heart and love that soul through me. And may I humbly do my part to win that soul for thee. So I want Anita, you lead us in that a couple times, would you? If you know it, sing it. If you don't, you'll catch on. Now you join us.
Lord, lay some soul upon my heart and love that soul through me. And may I humbly do my part to win that soul for thee.
Just do your part. Just do your part. It doesn't all depend on you. It doesn't all depend on me, but it does depend on us. Shine the light. Share the light. And as churches, can we please continue to send the light as well? Thank you so much.
You can go ahead and have a seat. Well, my name is Dustin Draear. I am blessed to have married Mike and Cassie's middle daughter, Whitney, who I think is awesome. From the day I met Whitney, I knew that she'd be my wife. It took her 3 years to figure it out as well. After 3 years of asking, she finally gave in and said yes. And then I had to go to her dad, who I knew was a preacher, to ask for her hand. I got a 3-point message while sitting at Lincoln Christian University in their coffee shop, and I remember some of it. He said yes, that's really all that mattered at that point in time. But Oil Belt Camp, for me, is something, I grew up in the church. I grew up leading worship at my hometown church, but I didn't have a place like Oil Belt Christian Service Camp. We were married on August 14th, 2010, and 2.5 weeks later, we showed up at family camp. I learned a few things that weekend. One is never let your wife pack her clothes. If you remember in 2010, it was the year that it was actually cold, and I had no pants. The second thing I remember, we came down and we were sitting in Jim and Sue Courson's camper, hanging out at the campground. And they kept using this word that I had no idea what it meant. And they kept saying, well, we got to get dressed up for Vespers. Mike alluded to it earlier. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I was not going to let them know I didn't know what we were talking about. Finally, later that evening, I just pulled Whitney aside and said, what on earth is Vespers? She goes, oh, it's the worship service. I just asked, why don't they just say we're going to worship? But apparently that's the thing. We've been here now 12 years and haven't missed a year of family camp, whether we've lived close or far. Because Oil Belt is a special place. If you've grown up here, I encourage you, don't take it for granted. It came full circle this summer when Tyler asked me to dean father-child camp, and he prefaced it with, you don't have to find any faculty, all you have to do is find a preacher. I said, done. Because what grandpa won't go to camp with his granddaughter? And I looked out and I watched my father-in-law ring the bell with his granddaughter. I know that my two girls will grow up in the church. My prayer is that one day they'll make the decision to follow Jesus. And I believe wholeheartedly that Oil Belt will have a story, a part of their story. There's something I've always known, but it hit me this summer. Serving at high school week, I was blessed to be a part of the worship team. And I stood there much like I am today, and I was looking out. And what I saw was a bunch of different types of people. Some more different than others. I saw different communities and churches represented in one place. I saw student ministers, worship ministers and lead ministers and faculty from all different places and walks of life and ages who came together for one goal. That was so that kids would know that they are loved by our Creator. I look across this room today, and there are many different communities and churches represented. We're all different. Each church is different. Each community is different. But we come together with the same goal. We come together united by the blood of Jesus Christ. We're united by what Jesus has done for us. And this morning we're going to celebrate that through an act called communion. And so with it being family camp, what we're going to do here in just a minute, we're going to pray. And on the way out, there's two tables over here and one in this back corner. Just grab communion for your family. Find a place, somewhere. It could be in here, it could be anywhere that you can just find a quiet place and spend time with your family and take communion together. As Jesus sat with his disciples, he took a piece of bread that was available to him and he said, this is my body, and every time you take of this, remember me. Then he took the wine and he did the same. He said, every time that you take this, remember me. Every time I read the story of Jesus doing that with his disciples, I often wonder what the disciples were thinking. I realize they were probably a lot like me when I had no idea what Vespers was. See, the disciples didn't know what was going to take place. But those soon-to-be 11 guys would change the world. And one day, many of them would lay down their life for the gospel of Jesus Christ. We are united by his blood with one mission, and that is to love people into a relationship with Jesus Christ. Oil Belt Christian Service Camp has a huge role in my life, even though I didn't grow up here. It continues to encourage, to challenge, and equip me to be a better father, husband, and a soul. Would you pray with me, and then you can be dismissed. And don't forget to pick up your kids. I was supposed to mention that. Father God, we thank you for this morning. God, we thank you that at the end of the day, it's all about you, Jesus. God, it's not about Oil Bell or any different church, but Jesus, it is all about you. God, I thank you for the time that we've had this weekend where we can come together to laugh, to cry, be a part of your family. God, I pray now that as we take the bread and the juice, that we would remember who you are and what you've done for us, and celebrate the fact that we can have a relationship with you because of your son, Jesus. God, it's in your great, mighty name this morning, and all God's people say.